Good afternoon and welcome to the Center for American Progress. My name is Emily G, and I am CAP's Senior Vice President for Inclusive Growth. The mandate of our nation's competition watchdog is a formidable one. Today's economy is marked by increasing industry concentration. Furthermore, the speed of communication and volume of data today surpasses any point in human history by magnitudes. New technology can be abused to conceal fees or fix prices, a practice all the more damaging in markets with a dwindling number of firms. On top of that, decades of overly permissive antitrust policy have given big corporations the upper hand over small businesses, consumers, and workers. When competition fails, Americans pay the price through higher costs online, at the grocery checkout, and at the pharmacy counter. Unfair business practices can make it harder for Americans to discern the price of a service or the quality of a product before purchase. And junk fees and price manipulation also play a role in the crisis of housing affordability. But one woman is leading a mission to change all of that. Today, we are deeply honored to host the nation's preeminent champion for competition, Federal Trade Commission Chair Lina Khan. In concert with the Biden-Harris administration's whole of government approach to competition, Chair Khan has fearlessly led the FTC to take action to lower costs on everything from prescription drugs and groceries to hotels and concert tickets. The FTC is combating junk fees, and that add up to costing Americans more than 50 million hours of wasted time each year. We are also delighted to have with us today Senator Ben Ray Lujan. His record of service to New Mexico and the nation shows that he has been dedicated to uplifting the middle class, building a clean energy economy, and bolstering consumer protection. He has introduced legislation to improve price transparency in delivery apps, and he has backed bipartisan efforts to hold companies accountable for consumer safety violations. Chair Khan, welcome up to CAP stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Emily, for the generous introduction. Thank you so much to the CAP events team for helping put this together. And thank you so much to CAP President Patrick Espard. It's just such an honor to be here. CAP has no doubt been driving some of the sharpest economic thinking in our country in recent years. And so I'm so appreciative to have this opportunity about the FTC's work, lowering costs for working families and fighting back against tricks and traps in our economy. Senator Lujan has been such a fierce advocate in Congress for the FTC's work, wanting to protect consumers from subscription traps and wanting to make sure that Americans truly enjoy the freedom to repair their own products. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion. I'd like to share with you all some of the work that the Federal Trade Commission has been doing to promote fair dealing as well as honest, competitive markets that keep prices low for Americans and keep illegal monopolies in check. As part of our work, we hear from thousands of Americans all across the country about what they're seeing and facing across markets. One person who reached out said that being a consumer can feel like gearing up for battle. That phrasing stuck with me because that person was an active duty military member, and they were talking about buying a car. It captured so vividly this basic way that being a consumer in today's economy can feel as if you always need to be on guard, looking out around every corner to make sure that you're not about to get tricked or ripped off, even when you're just going about the most ordinary of transactions. Canceling a subscription, finding an apartment to rent, booking a hotel for a family vacation that you've been saving up for, or buying a ticket to see your kid's favorite band. None of these should require inordinate canniness or enormous willpower or some kind of expertise in consumer protection. And yet, too often it can feel like they do. It wasn't always this way, and it doesn't have to be this way. The Federal Trade Commission was created by Congress to make sure that our markets are honest, competitive, and fair. This has long been our mission, but over the decades, our approach to doing this work has changed. Under President Ronald Reagan, the FTC adopted the view that the best way to protect consumers was to make sure that businesses were not lying to them. So long as people had access to accurate information, the thinking was they would be well positioned to make the best choices for themselves. Today, we see that this cramped and one-dimensional view of consumer protection is not actually enough to protect consumers in the 21st century. For one, we've seen that people can still be misled or treated unfairly, even if there's a disclosure buried somewhere in the terms of service. And we've seen how declining competition can allow firms to become too big to care, so that people don't actually have real choice. Blow most of your paycheck at the supermarket, or your family goes hungry. Cop up hundreds of dollars a month to big pharma, or go without your life-saving medicine. Let a tech app surveil your kid, or they get shut out of doing their homework. Pay your landlord's junk fee, or risk being evicted from your home. These are not fair choices. And under the Biden-Harris administration, the government has been using all of our tools to foster fair competition and fight for consumers. And it's been an honor for the FTC to be on the front lines of this fight. One area where this work is absolutely critical is housing. No American should pay more in rent or be kicked out of their home due to illegal business practices. Yesterday, the FTC announced an action against the largest landlord of single-family homes in the United States, Invitation Homes. According to our complaint, Invitation Homes was actively hiding junk fees from prospective tenants until they received their leases, and sometimes not until after they'd already signed them. This could cost each renter over $1,700 a year or more. This was not some kind of oversight. The CEO told his team to make those fees mandatory so that the company could, quote, juice this hog. Imagine this. You tour an apartment within your budget. It costs $55 to apply and then $500 to reserve it. After you've paid those non-refundable fees, you learn that the rent is actually higher than advertised, but you can't get your money back. So you move in anyway, only to discover the unit has a mold problem, exposed wiring, and rodents come and go. That's what Invitation Homes was doing to thousands of tenants across the country in places like Atlanta, Phoenix, Tampa, and more. To add insult to injury, Invitation Homes pocketed security deposits, charging renters for damage that was done before they moved in. Invitation Homes even initiated illegal evictions during the pandemic when the CDC had put a moratorium in place. And despite promising 24/7 emergency maintenance, Invitation Homes subjected residents to dangerous living conditions, sometimes for weeks on end. A woman who was 6 months pregnant lost heat for several days in the dead of winter. One resident had a sewage backup flooding their bathroom, and it took Invitation Homes 4 days to call them back and 6 days to come actually fix the plumbing. Yesterday, the FTC announced that we secured almost $50 million to reimburse residents who were harmed by these illegal practices, and we will continue to use all of our tools to make sure that Americans are not having to pay inflated rents or risk being kicked out of their homes because of these types of tactics. Invitation Homes is unfortunately not the only company that advertises a product for one price and then tacks on a bunch of fees so the final cost is much higher. If you've been to a concert recently, you know the drill. The tickets are $50, you wait for hours in an online queue, and then you manage to actually get some tickets. But once you add in the handling fee, the processing fee, the service fee, the convenience fee, suddenly that $50 ticket is an $89 ticket. And so you've spent all morning trying to get these tickets only to learn at checkout that they're almost double the original price. As one commenter put it, why is there a processing fee and a service fee? Isn't the act of processing the service that they're offering? People deserve to know what they're being asked to pay upfront, without the endless worry that they'll later be saddled with mysterious fees that they haven't budgeted for and can't escape. And that's why the FTC has proposed a rule to eliminate these deceptive surprise fees that collectively cost Americans billions of dollars a year. We've also unfortunately seen a rise in subscription traps. We've all been there. Every month you're paying for that gym membership you don't really use or streaming services you never signed up for in the first place. But it's absurdly difficult to actually cancel these services. You have to call customer service and spend an hour on the phone with a bot before you finally get through to a human being. Customer service then transfers you to membership. They transfer you to cancellations. And then suddenly the call drops and you have to do it all over again. It can feel like you're stuck in some type of endless doom loop. And many people understandably just give up and pay dozens, if not hundreds of dollars for subscriptions they don't want or need. And of course, that's kind of the point, to wear you down and keep taking your money month after month. I'm so excited that the FTC is planning to hopefully finalize a click-to-cancel rule that would require companies to make it just as easy to cancel a subscription as it is to sign up for one. Another tactic that we worry businesses could be quietly adopting is surveillance pricing. When companies collect private data from your devices and use it to target prices to individual consumers. They can use information like your precise location, your browsing history. They can even get information on how much you get paid and when to determine exactly how much to charge you. You could imagine the ways this could very quickly become exploitative. Imagine if a grocery store knows that your child has a peanut allergy and then charges your family more for the granola bars without nuts. Or imagine an airline knows that you've had a death in the family and need to fly across the country to make a funeral and then jack up the price just for you. The FTC has launched an investigation to get to the bottom of this practice to make sure that companies can't nickel and dime people over the things that they need most: a roof over their head, food on the table, and medicine they need to survive. All too often, unfortunately, we still hear about how Americans cannot afford life-saving medicines. And the FTC is doing everything we can to stop unlawful practices that make prescription drugs unaffordable. For example, some big pharma companies were abusing the FDA's patent system, filing junk listings on inhalers to keep prices high. Earlier this year, we called out 4 major inhaler manufacturers on these tricks, and 3 of them have just announced that they will lower the cost of inhalers from hundreds of dollars down to just $35. And just last week, the FTC filed an administrative complaint alleging that 3 prescription drug middlemen artificially inflated the price of insulin. We'll keep using all of our tools to make sure that no American is paying more for medicines because of illegal business tactics. When you zoom out and add it all up, these types of underhanded tactics could be costing people hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars every year. But it actually costs so much more than that. It costs you your time, and it can really come at the expense of people's dignity. The Federal Trade Commission, at the end of the day, is working to restore dignity to people's everyday commercial lives, in part by making sure we're bringing cases that fully represent the ways that consumers are being harmed in today's economy. In several recent cases, we've gotten people back compensated not just for the money that they lost, but for the time that they lost and for violations of their privacy too. Across the Biden-Harris administration, the government has been working hard to lower costs and protect Americans from corporate wrongdoing, coercion, and abuse. Imagine this: you book a hotel room, it says it costs $100, and it actually just costs $100. There's no convenience fee, it's just convenient. And the price they charge you is the same price they're charging me. You can cancel your unwanted subscriptions with just a click. You have a safe place to live with reasonable rent, and you can actually afford the medicines that you need. This world would save people more than just their hard-earned money and valuable time. It would save people an inordinate amount of stress and headache. This is the world that we all deserve to live in, a world where you always have another choice and the freedom to choose it, where you aren't constantly afraid that you're being ripped off, and where you aren't waking up every morning gearing up for battle. This is the world that the FTC and the Biden-Harris administration are fighting to make possible. We aren't asking for anything extraordinary. We're asking for the most ordinary thing on earth: our time, our dignity, and our peace of mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chair Khan, for those illuminating, probing set of remarks. Welcome, everyone, yet again to the Center for American Progress. It's really an honor to be able to bring two branches of government together to have a dialogue about something that both of these branches are determined to do, which is to protect consumers. And it's extraordinary to be able to welcome these two passionate leaders to our stage. Senator, Chair, before I get into the questions, I'm going to do a thing that I don't usually do when we start conversations here at CAP. Usually, the data that we dive into are a set of statistics that are about the issues themselves. But I want to pull back for a second because, for reasons that I don't entirely understand, some of this contest against greed, some of this desire and need to protect consumers is cast as controversial. I don't think there's anything controversial about it. I'm going to just read you some polling data that we've been able to pull up from great partners, public policy polling, and Data for Progress that should really help define where the public stands on these issues. Right now, today, roughly 80% of Americans, Republicans and Democrats alike, support FTC's actions to challenge drug patents from pharmaceutical companies. 85% of Americans support banning junk fees. 73% support preventing harmful corporate mergers. 64% support banning non-compete clauses in employment contracts. Now, I've heard some belly aching from a lot of people in C-suites and their frustrations, but 77% of Democrats feel that big tech companies use their monopoly power to hurt consumers. 88% support Chair Khan's block on predatory hospital mergers. I share all of those numbers, Chair and Senator, because it's really clear that the things that you are doing to stand up boldly on behalf of Americans, on behalf of consumers, is needed. And there's a tremendous amount of gratitude and support for it. And I think it's an important framing point as we enter into this conversation. And I should add, we were really grateful for the two of you in particular. So, Chair Khan, when you delivered your remarks, your sober remarks that, you added a little bit of humor to, which was needed for a little bit of levity is great right now. You touched on housing and you gave us a sense of what's happening with Invitation Homes and the actions that you're taking now. It's a devastating story that you just laid out. But of course, we know that this issue is not unique to Invitation Homes. And I wonder broadly, beyond that one business, what FTC is doing to continue to protect renters who are being bilked in this moment, and whether or not you think there are some things that rest of government can be doing to increase supply, which may take some of the agency away from bad actors in the field. The same question will apply to you, Senator.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for hosting this and for the great question. It's an incredibly important issue. I mean, we all know that one of the biggest monthly expenses for families is their rent. There's a big and important conversation about what to do on the supply side. The FTC right now is really focused on making sure that for the landlords that are already in the market, they're not using their power in exploitative ways. We've been doing listening sessions across the country. We were just in Atlanta a couple of months ago, hearing there about how Atlanta has really been ground zero for the influx of institutional investors buying up housing. And so we saw after the financial crisis, a lot of the housing was bought up by these major private equity firms, hedge funds, institutional investors, which can really both change the nature of a community, but also result in some of these predatory practices. So those are on our radar. I think there's a more fundamental question about whether we want and when we want, if at all, that type of institutional investor to control so much housing in various cities. We've also heard some concern about consolidation in various parts of the market that could impede or inflate costs of constructing homes. That's been something that's flagged for us as well. So that's on our radar.
Thank you.
Thanks to CAB for having us today as well, and for the work that you and the team do every day throughout the United States. whether it's getting a chance to work together with the legislative branch through hearings and developing policy, or asking the American people some simple questions to get an idea of where the country is. I think those statistics that were shared with us just help us better understand that people know the difference between right and wrong. People know when they're being taken advantage of. And the frustration often is the system built in such a way that it's baked in, where many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, we learned a little bit more of the use of word rigged, but how the system itself puts consumers at a disadvantage, and it's not right. In the area of housing, look, I don't know if all of you are homeowners here. Some of you may rent. I don't know if you've ever been in a building where when you're renting, and all of a sudden there may be a different company that takes over even management of that building. There may be something associated with private equity acquisition as well, not just in the ownership of the building, but also the choice and management, things of that nature. And maybe the hallways get a little dirtier. Maybe not all your calls are answered. The gym, the lights don't work, the internet doesn't work, the machines don't work, the water fountain may be out of order. You get what I'm saying? All these conveniences that you're already paying for, it's making you uncomfortable, and it's building this stress inside each and every one of you. Well, there's some folks out there, unfortunately, whose practices are to do those things on purpose so they can get the tenants out to move out on their own so they can jack up rents. That's happening, and it's a local government responsibility in addition to a federal initiative and a statewide initiative. But when the local government's tenant protections are not strong enough and it's hard to navigate, and you try to get someone on a phone and you just can't talk to them, you're going to try to move. And all of a sudden, maybe that same PE company or the new company that came in to manage, well, now they have the 5 firms in the community that you want to be able to stay in, or where your kids are going to school, or whatever it may be in proximity to work. And then what? That continues to happen day in and day out, and it's absolutely unfair. Now, I want to applaud those that are in these industries that are offering good services, taking care of tenants, taking care of you as customers, but all of us as people. But there needs to be rules in place such that we can go after those bad actors. But the industry themselves, whether it's PE or housing or the ownership with affordable housing, they also need to go after those bad actors. And what I've been seeing over the last few years, especially, is that there have not been a lot of industries in America who are willing to call out the bad actors. And then we hear complaints, well, why are you putting all these rules in place? And folks say, well, regulations, but they won't tell you which ones. They won't tell you which rules. And that's an area why where the FTC is needed so much, to make sure that we're going after those bad actors as well. And then I very much appreciate what Vice President Harris has said out there. Well, she's getting challenged with how she's going to do it. Congress needs to be a good partner here. If we're going to prioritize home ownership in America and building more houses in America and increasing the stock across America, Congress has to work with the next president of the United States. And I can't be going into that too much. I'll leave it there. But I want to look at housing policy that is going to make a transformational difference when it comes to home ownership and the availability of affordable places for us to live when we're having to work, especially when you're having to work in maybe 2 or 3 different cities and you have to try to find a way to make it work. We have to get that done.
Government cooperation across agencies and across the branches of government is entirely nonpartisan, Senator. So I appreciate that. I want to ask a set of questions about how you use your tools. But before I do that, Chair Khan, I was struck by your continuous use of the word dignity. It's not something that I think I've ever heard a previous person in your seat use as in as animating a fashion as you do. What does dignity mean in your work? How is it a mandate for your agency? How are you using the notion of dignity and that value as a way to normalize the rules of the road here?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And it really has come to me just from meeting with Americans across the country. I mean, one of the most important parts of my job, as I see it, is to really understand what are people out there seeing and experiencing in their daily lives, and how do we make sure that the work that we're doing here in DC is actually responding to those biggest pain points and make sure we're accountable in that way. And, we hear a lot about inflated costs, about all the ways that people are being pushed around or bullied or coerced. And it really does get to this fundamental issue of whether people are or not being treated with dignity. And one of the insights of lawmakers that created the FTC and that passed the laws protecting fair competition, requiring fair and honest markets, was the idea that you need to have fair and honest and competitive markets for people to really be able to experience dignity and freedom, right? I mean, one of the insights of the lawmakers who passed the antitrust laws was that it wasn't enough to just have the checks and balances in our political sphere and the safeguarding of concentrated political power to make sure we were free. There was no point in having those political checks if people were still going to be bullied and pushed around by economic tyrants in their commercial lives. And so the antitrust laws were really created as a way to safeguard those core liberties in the economic sphere, to make sure that you're not getting, bullied, coerced, pushed around in ways that would really undermine your sense of being free. And so the nuts and bolts of our job oftentimes is really in the mechanics, but I think keeping one eye on that deeper vision is really important.
Yeah, I do think we need more lawyers and government leaders who use the language and ethos of organizing in their work. So, Chair Khan and Senator, can we talk about junk fees? You said a few things about junk fees in your address, and last year the FTC proposed a economy-wide prohibition on junk fees. Senator, you introduced legislation that takes on the critical challenge of the lack of transparency that we get in third-party delivery apps that are just junk fees in essence. And I wonder for both of you, if you can speak to how junk fees reduce competition, how they're harming consumers broadly, and what these two branches are going to do with one another in conjunction to stem them.
Chair, thank you. Look, the chair laid this out perfectly. When you're working and engaging in a transaction and you find the price that makes sense for your budget, and all of a sudden you go to check out after you've been waiting and waiting and waiting, or maybe it's the meal that you are just craving after working for so many hours, and you found the deal for the restaurant, the eatery that is the one, and you get to checkout and the price is 2 or 3 times than what you started. My work in this particular space started with my time as a public utility commissioner once upon a time, then it was called Truth in Billing. And we were seeing all of these additions to a bill that most utility commissions had not taken up. And so the utilities were able to slap on all of these extra lines or just one big price at the end without telling you what it was. So this takes us back to the 2000s when there was an effort across America to say, no, there needs to be truth in billing, mobile phones, utility costs, whatever it is. Tell me what it is that I'm paying for. Well, the exploitation after that, as we get into a more modern society with the use of tools online, is, well, we're not going to tell you the total cost until you're about to check out and you want that ticket, you want that meal, you've gone to that place, it's taking you hours to get there, and then all of a sudden it pushes you up. It's not treating people with dignity. It's treating people unfairly. It's an unfair practice. And so whatever it is, put the cost out front. There's nothing that we should shy away from. Let's make sure we show that, but let's stand up to make sure that consumers can compare prices based on the budgets that we all have and how tight things are as well, and hold people accountable.
Senator, when you were a very young man, you famously ran blackjack tables, so you know something about unfair practices. So it's something else for you to be such a proselytizer on transparency.
Well, there's a lot you can learn from someone when you're sitting across the table from them, sometimes for 5 minutes, for 5 hours. You learn how to talk to people, but you also learn how to listen. And then you also learn why the lights are always on at those gaming establishments as opposed to them not be. So, just be wary as you engaging in that space. That's a whole other conversation.
And these corporations always have a tell. Chair Khan.
Well, the senator said something really important earlier, which was, we need to recognize that there are dishonest businesses, but there are also actually honest businesses. And one of the things that the junk fees rule and the legislation would accomplish, it would mean that honest businesses are not being punished, right? Because what you see when one company decides that they're going to do a bait and switch with the pricing is that it punishes the companies that are actually being upfront with what the real price is. And it can create this race to the bottom rather than incentivizing companies to be honest and allowing honest firms to get ahead. And so we really see this consumer protection work as, yes, making sure that consumers have transparency and can be treated fairly, but also ultimately about making sure that businesses have opportunity to compete on the merits. And so it's an important part of our work as well.
So one of the revolutions that we've all lived through in the last 15 years is the tech revolution, right? So there are new tools that are in our lives. Everything is governed and informed through algorithms and the use and deployment of these tools in ways that has just completely overwhelmed just about every single industry that we have to interact with. We have the challenge of the consolidation of power that is seemingly made much easier as a consequence of these tools. But the spiraling growth of these companies in every aspect of our lives is just overwhelming for so many of us. Chair Khan, you've spoken powerfully, you've acted powerfully on this question. But there has been a challenge that somehow to question is to thwart innovation. We're of course aware of the reality that we are in this new era of superpower competition between the U.S., China, and others on tech and on innovation. And I wonder in your seat how you're balancing the need to protect consumers, to strengthen competition, while at the same time lifting up and centering innovation.
So there's no doubt that America has been just on the cutting edge for decade after decade. And one reason for that, one comparative advantage that America has had, is that we've actually committed to a faith in competitive markets. Because what competitive markets mean is that the best idea can win, right? You have a market where if you have an upstart, an entrepreneur, an innovator that comes up with the next great thing, they're actually going to have the opportunity to bring it to market, to fairly compete and actually enjoy success and scale, rather than markets that are already locked up by the existing incumbents who can then use their monopoly power to squash and shut out any type of innovation. And so that commitment to fair competition has been such a critical ingredient in America's innovative edge. And so we need to stay the course on that and not get lured by saying, well, we actually need to protect our monopolies because they can better fight it out on the global stage. I think we've heard that song before, and I think we've seen the wisdom of actually staying the course. What we've seen instead is that when you do allow an enormous amount of consolidation go unchecked, it doesn't just risk putting us behind on terms of innovation, but it can also create enormous risk, right? I mean, we already see, unfortunately, week after week, a particular cyber attack or hack can result in the grounding of thousands of flights. We hear from senior members of the Defense Department about how consolidation in the defense industrial base is now risking national security because a single natural disaster can mean that overnight we lose access to a critical supply. And so, competition is absolutely critical as we think about these questions.
Thank you. Senator, similar question, but kind of a little bit of a deviation in my question to you. Many of us are concerned about whether or not adequate guardrails are being put up to protect, especially our children, from the ills of big tech and the privacy challenges that we have, the mental health challenges that we have, the isolation that we're seeing in our society. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're continuing to innovate, that we're growing more broadly share prosperity through tech, et cetera. I've heard you speak very movingly about your father, who was an iron worker. And as a consequence of his work, absorbed fumes, breathed in harmful particles from the air that eventually led to the lung cancer that made him pass on far earlier than he should have. And you've talked about the lack of transparency that companies have for their workers, your father in that instance, and for the consumers as well. And in a moment when we're all concerned about social anxiety, social isolation, growing polarization, but at the same time, these tools we're not putting the genie back into the bottle. I wonder how you think about your own personal experience, as somebody who was raised by someone who had to work in an industry that we relied on, that defined the second half of the 20th century of American power in the second half of the 20th century, and compare it to this moment where we've got to put up some guardrails, but at the same time, as Chair Khan said, we have to figure out ways to allow for innovation and growth as well. And I hope you don't mind the personal nature of that question.
Look, my father had a lot of living left in him, and a lot that he hoped to accomplish, predominantly for other people. When he passed away with a bout with lung cancer due to exposure, my father, who was an iron worker, he worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and the area that we believe that got him sick was he would create these molds out of lead, and they would get insulated with asbestos, and then they would pour different alloys into this stuff to create the supplies necessary for the machining of, in this case, national security weapons, things of that nature at the lab. What I don't understand is my father would have probably accepted the role and responsibility knowing that that was possible. A lot of families, unfortunately, are in that situation and position where you're working diligently to keep a roof over your head. Why was the government and the company not honest with him? That's all that we're asking for in all of these spaces. Just be honest. Share with the American people what the concerns are, what can happen to them, what might kill you. And if you choose to make that choice because there are not rules in place that are going to protect you as a consumer, that's a choice that we all can make. But we can't make it if we don't know what's going on. The advent of where we are in society, I see a lot of phones out there. I see notebooks on your laps. I'm looking for some wearables. I got one on my finger. We're all putting data out into the ethos. And right now, there's some companies out there that we actually subscribe to, that we pay a service to, who are collecting all this personal information on us. The problem now, in my opinion, is that a lot of these folks who say that they don't sell it, there's another third party in there that's using it that they then sell it, and they're selling it to others. Part of this pricing thing, I think, Orbis was caught a while back that Shelby was sharing with me that, they might charge you a different price if you had an iOS system or if you were using Microsoft products, because they might be able to charge you a little bit more. Uber, I mean, one of the European countries, I think they got caught, or not caught. A former Uber executive came out and said, we can charge people more for their ride if their batteries on their phones are down. Combat that to someone like my father who was fighting lung cancer. What PI was being collected on him and my mother, understanding their browsing habits, their shopping habits, their credit card usage, the gas receipt when they would go to the hospital, And how are they being exploited? It's not right. I challenged Mr. Zuckerberg years ago when I was in the US House of Representatives about the practice of his company with establishing profiles on people that were not customers. And then his company had the audacity to tell me when I questioned, how do people that are not your customers get that information wiped out? He said, well, they need to go in and log in and create an account. And then they can get rid of it. What? Magnify that and amplify that with every aspect of your life. The data in your car, you don't own it like the data on your hard drive on your notebook. That belongs to the companies. And then some companies say that they don't do a thing with it, but then we find out that an insurance company somehow got their hands on it. There are so many questions in this area about just being honest. Tell me what it is. And by the way, if you're going to make billions of dollars off of my PI, give me a cut. Help me out in that particular area. Let's be honest with the American people, treat them with dignity, and don't do to my dad, to anyone else, any other time, in any other space. If we can do that, we're doing our job.
Thank you so much, Senator. That was a powerful intervention. I'm really moving. I'm supposed to surrender the microphone and open up the conversation to the audience, but I'm going to be a little greedy for just a second longer. Secretary Khan, it's not paranoia if they really are out to get you, right? So what the senator just described, what you laid out from the podium about surveillance pricing is kind of like dystopian, like the notion that there could be that kind of bespoke targeting in the healthcare industry, housing industry, et cetera. Can you just give us some sense of what we can and should be doing to take up advocacy in support of the work that you and the senator are taking on specifically around surveillance pricing? I'm hoping that when we open this up, we'll get questions from the audience about grocery prices and what you're doing with Kroger's. We'll get some questions about private equity and health, all the things I didn't manage to get to. But just on surveillance pricing, what should we be doing as consumers, as Americans, to better advocate on this issue?
I mean, the most important thing is to acknowledge that it's not some type of inevitability what type of practices are allowed to take root, right? I mean, the senator was talking about how we're now living in a world where not only are we being tracked and surveilled, every second of the day, but that data is actually being packaged and sold in this ecosystem of data brokers, companies you've never heard of. It doesn't matter if you subscribe to these services or not, right? I mean, it seems like a wild, wild west, and people have a lot of unease about what's going on, but also a sense that it's too late and there's no way to control it. This was not an inevitability where we are today. It was the result of certain policy choices that were made about allowing these types of business models to take root. And so as we now look ahead and see some of these other potential practices take root, we need to say, we're not just going to wake up one day and have this be the world we live in. We need to work together with policymakers and others to figure out what's really going on, which is why it was so important to me to start this market inquiry, look under the hood, use the tools we have to expose what's already happening, and then make sure that we have a conversation to figure out, is this what we want to be happening, or do we need more rules in place to make sure that if we decide as a society, no, we don't want people to be exploited and charged a price based on what a company happens to know about the difficult spot they're in, that we keep that from happening.
Thank you, Chair Khan. So we're going to open this up. And as we begin to collect questions here, I'm going to ride on the organizing spirit of the chair, who just told us this is not inevitable. There are intentional choices that were made. One of those intentional choices was the dismantling of the FTC. We should all be aware of the fact that there is less staff in the FTC today than existed when Ronald Reagan became president of the United States. That's an intentional dismantling of this protection that all Americans are deserving of if we're going to manage to meet the challenge of dignity. Please. Who's got the microphone? Who's managing the floor? Thank you, Emma.
Hi, thank you for being here today. My name is Jasmine, and I'm a third-year law student. So my question first is actually directed at Chair Khan, and it's about the recent 6B study on social media and video streaming services that was released by the FTC last week, which really highlights all of the data collection and how that's used from social media companies. So talking about this data manipulation as well, Senator, what are things that we can do both in the executive and legislative? What's going on now moving forward with federal privacy legislation? And then my second question would be looking at the FTC and the DOJ's serial acquisition ROI, really looking at how companies are going absent scrutiny with acquiring so many different companies, especially in the big tech space. What else can be done there by the FTC in order to alleviate and create
Thank you.
competition?
So I'm going to have to excuse myself.
I know you have votes,
Because
Senator.
of a vote on this, on the Senate floor that I'm delayed. I may be the only member that's not voted yet, so I'll be excusing myself shortly. But out of the US Senate, there have been a few pieces of legislation that have passed out of committee with bipartisan support. One on child safety, and then another one which is more encapsulating when it comes to privacy guardrails in this space. The Congress should have passed these years ago, but they're sitting in the House right now. The chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, Chair McMorris-Rodgers, as well as Chair Cantwell, the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, also have another privacy package that they've been working on in a bipartisan way, but they've not been brought up on the House floor. I don't know why, especially when we talk about the Children Online Safety Initiative associated with concerns with what's been happening to kids, targeting of children. I mean, we've learned the practices of some of these social media companies, what they amplify. Hate, bullying gets amplified more than telling someone you look nice, nice smile, compliment someone. And that comes in dating. It's the same thing that many of us were exposed to maybe on the playground at school, what that bullying does and what it means to you and what it does to your mental psyche. Sadly, we've lost a lot of innocent young people across the country because of this. This legislation just fixes that in a very narrow space. But the lobbying dollars coming in to try to stop this stuff, those companies should apologize and they should be embarrassed because they should be leading the effort for all of these efforts to be passed for the safety of each and every one of us, and especially the young people in the country, some of the most vulnerable people that are out there, to make sure we can get this done. I'm hopeful that by the end of the year, we could see some action, but it's going to take all of us lifting our voices at every corner of America to get the House to act and get this to the President of the United States, who said he would sign these pieces of legislation. And I apologize. I'm going to have to excuse myself.
No, we understand. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
I'll just say that the senator has been such a fierce advocate and supporter of stronger privacy protections, especially for kids. And, you know, it can take courage to do that, especially given the lobbying dollars he mentioned. So very grateful for his leadership on that. You know, the FTC has been trying to make sure that the way we enforce the law is really matching the reality of how these markets are working. One of the most important shifts we've made is to move away from this notice and consent paradigm that basically said, well, as long as companies disclose somewhere in their terms of service what they're doing, it's probably okay. We all know that, you know, as people become more dependent on these services to navigate their day-to-day life, if their choice you're facing is, you know, do a critical task or, you know, that'll require signing up for endless surveillance or somehow say no to that, that's not a real choice for people, right? And so we've been instead bringing enforcement actions that say, for certain categories of sensitive data, like your health data, your browsing data, your precise geolocation, companies cannot just assume that they have the right to sell that or market it or share it with all sorts of third parties, including companies abroad. There has to be a presumption against that unless people are affirmatively giving their permission. So it's been a pretty significant change in how we're doing our cases. Beyond that, we had, initiated an advance notice to propose rulemaking, seeking public comment on whether there are rules that we could do. We've also been following closely what Congress is doing. On the serial acquisitions, it's a really important trend that we've seen. We finalized merger guidelines last year that specifically lay out how we're going to be viewing some of these deals in aggregate rather than just in silo. We also propose an update to the Hart-Scott-Rodino form that would give us better visibility.
Great. Next questions? Let's do this. If you don't mind, Secretary Khan, let's collect 3 questions right now. Let's take this one in the front. Let's take like one in the middle, one in the back, and see if we can get through them.
Hi, I'm a healthcare policy reporter at Inside Health Policy. So we know that FTC filed a lawsuit against 3 big PBMs. So I'm curious because drug companies are also responsible for keeping high list prices. There's the issue with PBMs, but I'm curious, how does FTC plan to hold the drug companies accountable for keeping high brand drug prices and keeping the generics out of the market? Is FTC still focusing on the investigation through the Orange Book, or are there avenues, other avenues being explored as well?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I'll just say very quickly, I'm very limited in what I can say about that case because it was filed in administrative adjudication. Our staff did put out a statement noting that they still believe the manufacturers could face liability, and we'll continue the Orange Book work as well.
Let's cluster a few together if we can, Emma. And please be brief with your question.
Yes, I will be quick. My name is Joe Van Wy. I work at P Street. I just want to thank you, Chair, for all of your hard work, and to thank the Senator as well for everything that he did in absentia here. Much of my work has been around tackling monopoly power in the food and agriculture system, one of the most heavily consolidated sectors of the economy. The FTC has done such incredible work here, and the Senator is on a number of critical pieces of legislation. But I'd love to hear from you sort of the harmful impacts of consolidation in the food system on producers and consumers, some of the work you've done to take it on, and some of the opportunities you see to expand on that work, especially with Farm Bill reauthorization pending constantly.
Got it.
Could we take an online question?
Yeah, absolutely.
This question is from Rebecca from CNBC. Chair Khan, since you took the helm of the FTC, you have overseen a ramp up of antitrust enforcement. How durable do you believe this new era of antitrust enforcement is? What is your agency doing to ensure that the new approach to antitrust enforcement you have ushered in withstands a change of administration?
I'll take those 2.
Sure. I'll say first, before Joe started focusing on food and agriculture, he was one of the unsung heroes of the House investigation into the big tech platforms and did really critical work getting that across the finish line. It's a really important issue. I mean, we've all seen the data, what shows that consumers are paying more, even as farmers are getting less, and the big middlemen in the middle seem to be taking a bigger cut, in part because we've seen so much consolidation. In agriculture, consolidation can have a really outsized effect on farmers and producers because even when there are just 4 companies nationally, for a farmer in like Alabama, sometimes they can literally just send to one company. And so the asymmetries of power can be especially acute. The FTC sued the 2 big pesticide manufacturers a couple of years ago. We alleged they were illegally blocking out generic makers of pesticide. This is a really hidden part of the market, but we allege it basically inflated costs for farmers to the tune of billions of dollars. Farmers then sometimes have to pass on those costs to the food eating public. So that's an important part of this. We've also been looking just across the food supply chain, across with our partners at DOJ, what more can be done. We've been very supportive of the efforts at USDA to strengthen the Packers and Stockyards Act, which is such a key set of rights for farmers. There was an acknowledgement that these asymmetries of power meant that Congress had to provide additional protection. So it's a really important set of work. On the question we got online, I mean, it's a really important one. And, the last time we saw a really significant reorientation at the FTC was during the President Reagan's tenure. They had, 8 years and then 4 years under President Bush, but they really paid a lot of attention to institutional durability. And so that's something we're thinking about too. One important component of that is going to be the outcomes in our cases. We've been really thrilled to already notch up an impressive set of victories due to our great staff and just the great cases that we're bringing. Some of these cases, especially on the monopolization side, can take longer to play out. So we're eagerly awaiting for those to go to trial.
We have time for one last brilliant question. You've had your hand up patiently throughout, so but let's get you a microphone.
My name's Alana from MLEX. So it's a quick question. You mentioned consumer protection issues in the housing sector. I'm interested in what antitrust conduct and consolidation issues you see in that sector, particularly since you briefly mentioned consolidation as a problem.
Well, one of the top antitrust issues that we've seen surface through lawsuits filed by state attorneys general, by the Justice Department, is this issue of potential collusion through algorithm. There have been cases filed against this company, RealPage, complaints alleging that RealPage has basically been facilitating effectively price fixing and rents through algorithm, and there's no AI exemption to the antitrust laws. And so those are a really important set of issues. The FTC has investigated and stopped mergers in areas like cement, where, especially in places like California, we saw that significant consolidation in cement risked increasing and inflating construction costs. And so those are the type of markets where we've heard some concern.
Chair Khan, thank you so much for your clarity of purpose, your clarity of vision, and for always remembering who exactly it is that we're in the service of. Thank you so much, Chair Khan.
Thank you.